Today was our second session of Star Trek Adventures. The campaign is called To Know the Unknown. Now, in a sense, this session was also a first session because we only had one player who was there for the original session. Remember, we have a group of 5, but only 3 people were available for the first session because of birth. And in this session, because of schedule changes, we also had 3 players, but 2 of the 3 players were different than 2 from the previous. So it almost felt like session 1 was a pilot episode, and then the next session was after some, changes. Ship was updated, and the crew was a little different. That's not exactly how it is, but it had a little bit of that feel for me. This session was what I consider to be our first full episode. The Shakedown cruise was meant more of a exploration of the system, getting to know each other. That didn't work out because 2 people couldn't make it. But anyway, now this session was a lot of fun for me. I really had a lot of anticipation going into it, and then I had a lot of fun during it. The events were quite simple, but most of what will be in this particular video is how it was done. So, in this session, the crew members who were active and available were the executive officer, the ops manager, and the chief of security. In the previous video, we had the executive officer, the chief surgeon, and the chief science officer. So we had a different mix of focuses. To put things in context, I'll open up with a recap. The first scene has the USS Crow approaching a nebula. They are in space that's considered to be unknown and unexplored to Federation allied species, beyond the Romulan neutral zone. And while ostensibly their mission is very much on that, making first contact with civilizations beyond the Romulan Star Empire and its neutral zone, in order to, let's say, provide an alternative to the oppression offered by the Romulans, they are still a multi-role explorer. They are there to make first contact, to learn new things, and of course conduct scientific missions. So it's a routine examination of this nebula, and they're alerted to a distress signal which gets suddenly cut off. So this throws the crew into action. They begin to investigate. And as they close with the vessel that they discover, they are very quickly able to reveal the competence of each crew member and well-chosen focuses for their discipline. So we have our ops manager, who has a focus in ship recognition, is able to determine a lot from the sensor data about what the ship in distress might be, and is then also able to put 2 and 2 together when they discover that there is some kind of aggressor, which is firing disruptors on it and beaming boarding parties over. The security officer and the XO, call the captain to the bridge, raise shields, and are prepared for red alert. Then, as they approach, it's determined that they want to interpose the Crow between what we're going to call a freighter for now and this aggressor ship, and extend their shields around the crippled freighter. So as they're doing this, the aggressive ship beams its boarding parties back aboard, does a dramatic looping maneuver around the freighter, and starts heading right at the Crow as if to do a flyby at high speed. And so the security officer, quick to act, requests permission, receives permission, and activates the tractors. But the tractors are so powerful compared to this aggressive ship that it begins to break up under the strain. So again, very quick to act, and the crew is rolling ones like you would not believe. I haven't seen so many criticals rolled in a string, possibly in my lifetime. It seemed at one point one of the players commented that the dice must be loaded because they just kept coming up with the Star Trek, arrow symbols, which is pretty cool. So they are very quick to act, and they get all 3 transporter rooms in coordination, and they start beaming survivors out of the wreckage. While beaming operations were taking place with the survivors, the bridge crew were trying to figure out all they could about the freighter. Now, the freighter turned out to not really be a freighter. The confusing life science they'd gotten at the beginning about it being full to the brim of very low-level life signs turned out to confirm the ops manager's earlier guess that it might be a sleeper ship. It was, and it's a sleeper ship that was traveling, of course, at sublight speed, full to the brim with sleeping, let's say, colonists. But its drives had been knocked out by the pirates. No clue yet what the pirates wanted. Now, the security officer, no slouch, had wanted the transporter officers to beam the survivors from the wreckage directly to the brig. This didn't work out exactly as planned, and they needed to beam up 12 survivors, and they managed to get 9 successfully beamed to the brig, but 3 of them had to be pulled into the transporter room or be lost. There was a lot of drama, and we're all very familiar with transporter room technobabble, and so we were really enjoying the opportunity to take supporting characters, create a transporter chief on the fly, inhabit him, and turn this into a very dramatic scene of making this rescue possible. That transitioned into the security chief going into the brig and beginning to interrogate these prisoners. But who are the prisoners? They turned out to be an unusual species that we hadn't met before, and in kind of cheesy early Star Trek convention, we gave them the name the Aquans because they had the look of a species that had a lot of importance in marine life to their development. They still had a very fish-like features and a pale blue cast to their skin, but they were dressed in this outlandish gear, and like as you would expect from pirates, very individualistic and not conforming to any kind of social convention. So their crew seemed to have a lot of tension in between them, and as the interrogation is beginning, they figure out who the first mate is, who the second officer is, and the captain is brought in. He was among the 3 that went to a transporter room. So security brings them all together. All 12 captives are brought together in the brig. It's very obvious that the captain rules by charm, but is also a very clever person, very dashing, almost a swashbuckler. And our chief of security is a Vulcan, right? So stone-faced and very, not exactly aggressive, but willing to look at available options and meet force with force when logical. So this captain of the pirates tries to sweep up her hand in a flamboyant kiss, and was shunned. So then security is tasked with getting more information from the pirates. They're all locked up in the brig, and the XO summons the chief of security, the ops manager, and himself to form the away team. And they beam across to this sleeper ship, where they discover that what the pirates were looking for were the personal effects of the sleepers. They were scattered all around the room because they'd been interrupted by the arrival of the Crow. And there were hundreds and hundreds of bodies. And very quickly they put together that this is the 6th ship in a fleet of 12, which were hastily assembled and launched off into space by a pre-warp civilization. And the universal translator is mostly effective in figuring out the language and the records of this crew, but one thing is clear, that they were fleeing the arrival of the Romulans. Where are they going? We're not really sure. They have the destination coordinates, but this is uncharted space as far as they're concerned. They're not really sure where they're headed, if they're headed even to an M-type world. It's somewhere on the other side of this nebula. This ship isn't going to go anywhere. However, its drives have been knocked out. How did the pirates learn about the ship? Have they raided others? Have they been picking their way down the line? And at which end of the line of ships did they start on? What was it that the Romulans were doing? Why were the Romulans choosing this pre-warp civilization to dominate and oppress? Investigation revealed that their drives were powered by a, insert technobabble mineral here, which would be very suitable for the type of artificial singularity drive that the Romulans use. So the pieces start to click together, and that's when it hits the crew. In what way can and should we become involved in this, right? What is the effect of the Prime Directive? This is our first challenge in this way as characters. And we take a look at everyone's character sheets and we start assessing values, and it's that point that this session comes to a close. Now, it doesn't seem like we did very much. However, there was a lot of rolling, a lot of interaction, a lot of role play, and a lot of laughter. So we're going to be running our sessions as 90-minute sessions. That's all the time that we have. So once a week, 90 minutes. And we're going to do our best to stick to that regimen if at all possible. Which means I'm thinking that in order to bring out all the strengths of Star Trek Adventures, I want to actually structure play like a 1-hour-ish episode of television. And we're going to play them in 2 parts. So every 90 minutes is going to be the first half of the show, and I'm going to reference things like commercial breaks. I'm going to treat it like a television show. And so I structured play like this. We had a pre-credit scene. That's where they're looking at the nebula. I describe the crow approaching this electric blue nebula and the distress signal coming in, and then the crew starts to frantically trying to figure out where the distress signal is coming from. And then we get our first view at long range of this pirate vessel attacking the sleeper ship. And the XO's calling for red alert, and we fade to black, and the opening credits start. We have the guy playing the XO, Lawrence, does our voiceover. We have our own Space, the Final Frontier voiceover for the series. He's going to do that each time we play, unless another character is more appropriate for a particular episode. So he does that. We come back in, and I tell them the title of the episode, right? Pirates on a Space Dust Sea. And we all laugh at the ridiculous kind of old Trek feel of the title. And then, okay, we've just called for red alert. What are you going to do? So they begin their operations. And then it was nonstop all the way through until the end of our 90-minute session. So, as this was the first time to play for 2 of the players, there were quite a few points where we encountered a new mechanic where things were explained. And we took time at the beginning, of course, to give everybody a refresher course on how their characters would interact with the dice mechanics and so on, and what were some options. But we've all played together for years now, as everybody present was a member of the Star Wars campaign that we were doing previously. So we all fit together really nicely, and we're aware of our own shorthands of language, I think. So the session had a very nice, smooth flow to it. And it will be nice when all 5 members are present to work toward that kind of cohesion again. Everybody's been watching a lot of Star Trek. It's really obvious. So the language that was in use and the attitudes that were displayed gave me a very strong The Next Generation feel, which I'm going to have to work to meet, as I feel I'm pulling things in the original series direction. And maybe that's okay, but I'm going to try even harder to make it match the more grandiose and sometimes bombastic nature of Next Generation. So the vibe during play was one of very strong shifts between out-of-character and in-character modalities. And while I tend to prefer spending as much of my time as possible in an in-character stance, there are some games where that's impractical, or there's some situations where you just don't want that. You just want to hang out with your friends and have a good time. And while we are learning a new system, we spend a lot of time out of character, and we enjoy our in-character moments. And then what I've noticed with this group is that as system becomes familiar and drops into the background, we spend more and more time role-playing. But we are a group that just kind of likes to enjoy each other's company. This is one of our few periods to have fun. So it's a nice vibe, and it's nice to be able to switch back and forth and to role play until there's an opportunity for a role. And in this system, the roles are significant. There are a few of them. They have a wide variety of ways to be modified. And then once the results are in, you go again. There's not a lot of back and forth. with roll, counter roll, and that sort of thing. So I found that the session enabled us, even though it was only 90 minutes long, to pack in a lot of stuff of import, of pretty direct relevance to each of the characters and their mission, and highlight a lot of the things that I consider to be basic about Star Trek Adventures. Now that we have established this as a basis, we can move toward other more complicated things like gated challenges, which is something that I put in place for the first session, the Shakedown Cruise, which was begun, but other things took precedence. Timed challenges, discoveries, and this sort of thing. So all of these will be folded in. And eventually, I'm sure, space combat might become necessary. Maybe even something like on an away mission, some kind of challenge with a creature, or some kind of environmental situation where hand phasers might be used. It's hard to say. The crew and the players themselves aren't adverse to violence, but there is a very strong sense that people are taking Star Trek seriously, and that violence is not going to be our first choice. And I've had a conversation with Lawrence actually about the system, where he has noticed already, even without having read the book, just going through the character creation process and having discussions with me and looking at the talents and so on and so forth, he's noticed that the system tends to steer you away from violence as an option. It seems to steer you toward what we see in the series, where give peace a chance, they're not evil, they're misunderstood, are basic precepts of characters' outlook on the universe. So that's very nice. The system is working very hard to reinforce its genre, making it very easy for we, the players, to play within that genre. So, first session, I had a great time. These recaps are not going to be session to session. Like with the Star Wars campaign, I'll be looking at big chunks of the campaign in toto. So don't worry, you're not going to be inundated with little blurbs. But the way it's going to work is that each episode is going to comprise two play sessions, and they will, as I said, be conducted like TV episodes. So the recaps are going to say in the last, short arc of however many episodes it's been. So it'll be very different from the way the Star Wars campaigns was related in recaps. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.